Renting versus buying. What's the right move in 2023? As those mortgage interest rates skyrocket and home prices continuing to rise, it's worth taking a fresh look at that question. Hey, I'm Chase Gallimore, your go-to guy when it comes to real estate. And today we're going to break down each of those scenarios as we try to determine what the right move is for you and your family. Mortgage interest rates today are hovering right around 8%. Home prices in September were up about 2.8% from the same time last year. But guess what? Life goes on. People are still getting married, starting new careers, having kids, moving to new areas. So is it a good time to buy a home, or should you just rent with those inflated rent prices? On one hand, you'll hear it's dumb to buy a house in today's market. On the other hand, you're dumb for paying all that rent and throwing money away. So it's kind of sounds like a lose-lose situation right now. Well, today we're going to break it all down for you. So first, let's talk about renting. And this idea of renting is a bad idea. This is a very common sentiment in the US, and especially here in the South. We tend to really value home ownership. Beyond that, renting doesn't really build up equity. At least for you, it doesn't. You have less control over your home, and it can be costlier in the long run. Plus, perhaps more importantly, renting lacks certain tax benefits associated with home ownership. However, there are a lot of benefits to renting as well. There's a low startup cost. You don't need a down payment or closing cost. You're basically looking at a security deposit and maybe your first month's rent. So let's say your rent will be $1,800. Well, you really only need about $3,600 saved up to secure that new home. That allows for more financial flexibility. You also won't have to worry about saving for those big maintenance or repair items. Let's say your AC goes out or your roof starts leaking. You won't need $10,000. You'll just need to call up your landlord to take care of it. Well, that will free up your cash to tackle your savings goals, or maybe you have a lot of debt to knock out. Well, you can now take that on as well. Lastly, renting gives you a bit more flexibility. Let's say your neighbor starts midnight rock band practice right in the backyard. Or worse yet, they start cooking meth and selling it right out of their garage. If you own your home, you're kind of stuck unless you want to take a big loss. Now, when you rent, you can be out in 6 to 12 months, depending on your lease. And chances are in that situation, your landlord may even be willing to work with you to find a more suitable home to rent. That flexibility also gives you the opportunity to learn about a new area you just moved to, or gives you an out if a job transfer or any other kind of move may be in the cards in the near future. So what does the rental market look like right now? Well, there is some good news. Nationwide, there's been an increase in rental listings, bringing those prices down just a little bit. A couple of reasons that's happening. One is Airbnb. Owners that created short-term rentals from their investment properties are sometimes having to pivot to long-term rentals in many areas. For some, it's because of an oversaturation in that area where investors were just buying them up and turning them into Airbnbs. For others, it's new restrictions from municipalities. The national average rent price for a single-family home right now is just over $2,000. As a general rule of thumb, when calculating rent prices, homeowners will set monthly rent at about 1% of the property's value. For instance, if a $200,000 home is up for rent, it will go for about $2,000 a month. Now, this estimate could go up or down depending on supply and demand in your area. Now, let's talk about buying. Home ownership has been a no-brainer for so long. It's been quite a shock to hear this might not be the best time for them to buy a home right now. For the past decade, home values have gone up about 3 to 7% every year. But since 2020, those values have increased about 10 to 20% each year. Now, the reality is those types of major equity gains are likely over. Meanwhile, the current home buying environment is kind of interesting right now because As of right now, you actually might still find it to be very competitive out there. There's still a lot of buyers in today's market, and that means more competition, making it more difficult to get a good deal. But if you're patient, you can find a house that's going to fit what you need at a reasonable price. Yes, rates are high right now, like in the 8% range for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So this is making a lot of people back out of the market. That means there is a possibility you may see prices start to decline a little bit due to a decrease of buyers. But we're still seeing sellers sit on the sidelines because they don't want to sell and then have to go buy another home and give up their lower interest rates. So that means less inventory out there. That means less homes for sale. Well, that's a quick look at renting versus buying. So now let's look at the long-term goals. The numbers may be close and it might be cheaper in the short term to rent your home, but in my opinion, home ownership should be your ultimate goal, specifically long-term ownership. Over the last few years, it's been easy to buy and sell and make a nice profit because of how those home values have really skyrocketed. But as the market settles down, that's going to be a bit more difficult in the short term. However, you can still count on increased values over the long term. It may be just back to those 2 to 7% increases each year. Now, I'm not an expert, but I don't foresee a crash like we saw back in 2008. Today's market is very different. There's a lot to say about that. That's a video for another day. In fact, I actually have made one of those. But the moral of the story is here, don't expect a major crash in the housing market. I believe we will see a slow increase instead in home values over the next 3 to 5 years as all the dust begins to settle from that recent boom. Therefore, you should plan to build long-term home ownership. What I mean is you find a house that will fulfill your needs for about a decade. A house you're going to live in for a while. As that equity builds over a decade, you will still be in a great position to sell and then find your next home using a substantial profit from that sell. So if this is the goal and you are evaluating right now whether you should rent or buy, let's look at 3 main factors. Number 1, what is your financial situation? Number 2, what is your market looking like? Your local market education. And number 3, what is your current risk tolerance? Let's go over each of these questions and figure out what the ideal scenario would be. First, your financial situation. Ideally, you have a healthy credit score, meaning 700 plus. Now, you could buy with a score of at least about 650 or maybe even a little less, but we're talking about ideals here. Now, your emergency fund is funded, you have a savings fund started, and you have money for a down payment and closing costs. You also are prepared to pay that monthly mortgage payment. That monthly payment should equal about 25 to 30% of your net income or less. That way, you're still in control of your finances. You also want to get those credit balances under control. Now, that doesn't mean you have to have it all paid off. All the debt doesn't have to be eliminated, but your lender will look at your debt to income ratio, and anything over about 50% will make it very difficult to get a loan. If you have all these items in place, you're technically in a good financial situation. Second, local market education. This means you have a clear understanding of current housing value trends specific to your area. What are home prices doing in the exact neighborhoods that you are looking in? You also need to know how many homes have sold there and are for sale. Also, how many are pending for sale. This will give you a better sense of whether you're dealing with a buyer's market or a seller's market. There are a lot of ways to keep up with these trends, but the easiest is just to reach out to a local expert. A local realtor will have a lot of knowledge about the local market, and they will be glad to share that with you. And the third category is risk tolerance. You're going to do a self-assessment here and reflect on your comfort level with uncertainty. You can handle the idea that your property value might fluctuate, or can you handle that? Are there large expenses on the horizon? Things like educational costs, medical needs, potential job changes that might impact your ability to manage housing related expenses. And then there's personal life stages and goals. Consider where you are in life right now. For instance, maybe you're planning a significant life change, something like a marriage or starting a family. These things can influence both your risk tolerance and your housing needs at the time. So looking at these categories, you might find yourself having more strength in two of them. Now, if you have them all three mastered, go ahead, go buy that house. But most people are finding themselves stronger with two of these, and one of them maybe not so much. So let's go over each scenario and see which one you find yourself in and what I recommend if you are in that situation. So first, let's talk about people that have a strong financial situation, a good local market education, but a very low risk tolerance. That means you're very cautious. You're in a good financial situation. You have a good feel of the local market, but maybe you're just not comfortable with the current state of the market. The uncertainty in today's market may be concerning. The fact that values can go up or down just maybe doesn't fit with your personality. So what do you do about that? I think number one is to continue to build your wealth, to put yourself in a better financial situation. That is one way to reduce that risk. The more you put down when buying a home, the less you'll have to invest in the long term, less interest you'll have to pay. And if you're putting down 20% or more, you can avoid paying that mortgage insurance on top of everything else. Now, if you are an overly cautious person, it probably won't ever feel like the right time to buy a home. So at some point, you just need to take a leap of faith. If you're currently renting, make sure to rent below your means so you are saving some money as well. At some point, the market will seem more predictable and the average monthly payment will begin to come down a bit and become more affordable as those interest rates start to come back down to earth. Now let's talk about someone who's finding themselves in a very solid financial situation, and maybe they are pretty risk tolerant, but they don't have a lot of local market knowledge. This is typically someone that's very optimistic or even compulsive savers. They have so much money in the bank that they think they're invincible. Here's the advice I have for you guys. Your lack of local market analysis is a bit concerning, but the good news is this is a pretty easy fix. It's easily remedied. Go out and do some digging about your local market. You don't want to find yourself in a position where you paid way more than you should have, where your neighborhood is trending in the wrong direction, or you just don't like where you live. In this scenario, you may be better suited to rent for 6 to 12 months and learn more about the area where you live, and then go find your long-term home. No reason to rush on a long-term investment. And lastly, we have our people that are really strong in local market education and very strong in risk tolerance, but they may not find themselves in great financial situation at the moment. You probably know all about the local market. You have a realtor or realtors on speed dial. Is that really even a thing anymore? You check out all the open houses and you are ready to go. This is the carefree group. So if you're carefree, here's some advice for you. Maybe you could have gotten away with this mindset in the past decade, but you owe it to your future self to not put yourself in a potentially dangerous financial situation. So sit down, give yourself a financial audit, and get your finances in order. And my second piece of advice is work on building your emergency fund first, and then start a general fund, and then start saving for your housing fund. It's okay to rent for a while you're figuring this all out. And let me tell you this, lenders and realtors are salespeople at the end of the day. If you go chat with them, they're probably going to find a way to qualify you for a house. And remember, qualifying isn't the same thing as affording a home. So have the self-discipline not to talk to anyone until you've met your personal goals. Now, wherever you find yourself, I want you to be successful in your real estate journey. If you benefited from this video here today, give me a like and a follow, and please share this with someone who could benefit from the topics we discussed here today. All of this helps my channel grow. Again, my name is Chase Gallimore. I'm an associate broker here at Exit Realty Shoals, and I want to be your go-to guy when it comes to real estate.